Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. I finished what I was doing, locked up the office, and hurried off to the Carson house. It was about a 20-minute drive, and as I drove, I thought about Brittany. I didn't do that very often, unless it was a nightmare about seeing her in that damn three-way. Now, though, I found myself wondering again why she had ruined our marriage and tore our family apart. I had pondered this many times since the divorce but never bothered to ask her about it. I didn't trust or respect my ex, and I didn't think she would tell me the truth anyway. I'd considered the usual reasons cheating spouses give for their behavior and discounted most of them. 1. Looking for a bigger, no. I'd seen Benny's equipment, and he was no bigger than me. 2. Wealth. I didn't see it. Benny had been well off, sure, but so were we. We had a respectable savings account, a nice house in a great neighborhood. We didn't worry about paying our bills or dealing with repairs. We weren't rich, but we certainly weren't hurting. 3. Unsatisfying intimate life, no way. We had intimate at least 3 times a week, sometimes more. I was always ready and willing to try something new. Brittany had asked me to try different positions and role-playing, and I never refused. Hell, I even let her tie me up once because she was excited about it. So no, I didn't think that was it. For abusive spouse, not just no, but hell no. I had never raised my hand to her. 5. Spouses cheating. I'd never so much as touched another person since we'd agreed to date exclusively. 6. She had decided she was gay, even though she was letting Benny perform intimate on her and seemed to enjoy it. She never refused me either. So why? I didn't know, and it didn't matter anymore. The second I saw her having intimate with someone else, our marriage was over. Infidelity is unforgivable to me. If you don't have it in you to be faithful, don't commit. It really is that simple. Society is very accepting of people who choose not to marry, so there's no reason to get married and then cheat. If I had forgiven her and stayed with her, I would have lost every speck of self-respect I had. My arrival at my ex-in-law's place finally stemmed the depressing tide of my thoughts. Their front door swung open as I drove up the gravel drive. Danielle and Brian were waiting. By the time I got out and made my way to the door, I could tell instantly that not all was well with them. Brian stood very close to his big sister, and Danielle had one arm wrapped protectively around him. The kids got along well with each other, but this wasn't typical behavior. Behind them, George stood with one hand resting on each of their shoulders, watching me with a bitter, angry look as I walked up the short flight of stairs. As I reached the porch, he leaned down to the children. "Kids," he said gently, "I need to talk to your dad for just a minute. Would you please go inside and make sure you have all of your things ready to go? One of us will come get you when it's time to leave, okay?" "Sure, Grandpa," Danielle said for both of them. They turned and went inside, leaving me on the porch with their grandfather. He gave me a hateful glare, the likes of which I had never seen from him before. I simply looked back neutrally, waiting for him to get whatever it was off his chest. "What the hell is wrong with you, Don?" he said at last. "Other than a mild case of nearsightedness, I'd say there's nothing wrong with me," I replied. "Thanks for asking though." "Quit being a smartass." "You know what I mean," he snapped angrily. "Your wife is in a mental hospital, and you don't give a damn." "First, she's not my wife," I shot back. "She messed up our marriage of her own free will, fully knowing the consequences. And second, you're right. I don't give a damn. I see no reason why I should, nor do I see why you're so pissed off about it. I didn't cheat on her, she cheated on me, doofus. It's all your fault that she's hospitalized." George retorted. "You posted that video on the internet, ruined her reputation so completely that she's had a horrific time getting a job that pays her what she's worth. I told your stupid kids I was going to do it if I didn't get what I wanted. She was warned ahead of time but decided to fight me anyway. She reaped the consequences. And by the way, if she isn't earning what she's worth, she should talk to her pimp about it. I said coldly, or is she working freelance? George's face reddened with anger as he shouted, grabbing a handful of my reflector vest. I grabbed his wrist and easily removed his hand from my clothing. I did everything I could to be gentle. I had no wish to injure him, but no one manhandles me, and that's all there is to it. Think very carefully before you try getting physical with me, George, I said softly and calmly. I know you love Brittany, but the truth is that everything that's happened to her recently is her fault. You can blame me for whatever you want, but even you must realize the truth. Besides, if it had been you, wouldn't you have done the same thing I did? I held his wrist firmly until he finally relaxed his arm. I released him and stepped carefully back. He looked more defeated than anything else, but I wanted to make sure he didn't try to swing at me. I don't know, maybe I would have, he said. I guess it's just easier to be angry at you than to admit that my daughter, he broke off, shaking his head in furious denial. After a few moments, he looked at me again and took a deep breath. Will you at least let me tell you what's going on? Fine, go ahead, I said, exasperated. If George noticed my tone, he elected not to mention it. Brittany tried to kill herself, he said flatly. Do the children know what she did? I asked. Yes, he said, closing his eyes in pain. Danielle is the one who found her mother unresponsive on the bed and called 911. Brittany had apparently deliberately taken an entire bottle of sleeping pills. When she didn't come out of her room when the kids got home, Danielle went in to check on her. He sighed heavily and scrubbed his eyes with his hands. His shoulders heaved slightly, and I felt a slight tinge of sorrow for him. He wasn't responsible for what his daughter had done to me, after all. I felt terrible for my children, though. I honestly couldn't imagine what Danielle must have felt when she found her mother like that. I was also proud of my little girl for not losing her head in a crisis and doing the right thing. I made a special note to tell her so. How are they dealing with what happened? I asked. Danielle and Brian are both horribly upset, George said. But I think it's actually been worse for Brian. Danielle hasn't left his side this whole evening. I nodded slowly. Okay, thank you for telling me. I'll keep a close eye on the two of them. Over the next few days, I did exactly that. I spoke with both of them about what had happened with their mother. I also praised Danielle for her quick thinking and calm in the midst of the crisis, which brought a happy glow to her young face. After a few weeks of treatment, Brittany was released. She was pronounced cured, I guess, but I didn't buy it. I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist, but I don't see how simply talking to a professional and maybe some pills could solve issues so serious that she thought killing herself would resolve them. She insisted that we return to the shared custody arrangement we've been following all this time. I asked my children what they thought about that idea. Danielle clearly had reservations, but Brian was eager, almost jumping up and down at the thought of spending time with his mom. Unless you're willing to go back in for another long, drawn-out court battle, you'll have to give her what she's asking for, Mandy said when I told her how I felt. You might be able to convince a judge you're right. After all, a suicide attempt is pretty strong evidence of being an unfit parent. Mandy's voice was calm, but her eyes told another story. The way they bored into me made it clear how she felt. My own feelings were mixed. I was still furious with Brittany and couldn't stand the thought of giving her access to the kids again. But Brian had made his wishes clear. He wanted to go back to spending time with his mother as well as me. Danielle, I knew, would go along with her brother to keep an eye on him. She had become a little lioness where he was concerned. In other circumstances, it would have been cute. I'm not going to try and make it so Brittany can't see the kids, I said finally. Mandy's gaze softened. No, I didn't think you'd be like that, she said. But on the other hand, I don't want either of the kids to have to deal with the trauma of their mother trying to kill herself again. I don't know what happened to her that turned her into such a selfish, irresponsible person, but there's no denying it happened, I said. Mandy leaned back on the couch next to me, her expression pensive. Then she sighed softly. How about we talk about something more pleasant than her, she suggested, caressing my arm. Mandy smiled and kissed me lightly. I'm always up for talking about something pleasant, she said. What did you have in mind? This was it, the moment of truth. I had only grown closer to Mandy over the last few months. She was everything I wanted in a woman. She spent most nights here at home with me, sharing my life, even during my weeks with the children. Finally, I decided it was time to pop the question. It was only the second time in my life I had done this, and I was nervous as hell. As I slipped the ring box out of my pocket, I thought we might talk about our future. Mandy, I love you, and so do the kids, I said. I love being with you and hate being apart from you. I opened the ring box and held it out to her. Will you marry me? Her eyes grew wide as she stared into the ring box. I had told the kids about my intentions, and not only had they approved, but they also helped me choose this ring. Mandy's eyes rose from the box to look at me, and her gaze was sad. That wasn't what I had expected. She stretched out her hand and gently closed the lid of the box. Don, it's a very beautiful ring, and I'm touched. I really like you, but marriage, really? Mandy gently shook her head. Don, honey, you're a wonderful lover, and from what I've seen, you're a great father to your children. You are a good man and have treated me like a princess since we've been together. You'd be a good husband, but not for me. I sank back into the couch. I don't understand. If I'm really a good man and all that, why don't you want to marry me? I asked. I felt like we matched so well together, and we could be really happy and build a wonderful life. But Mandy was shaking her head at me, her eyes sad. She gently reached out and stroked my face, brushing away a tear I hadn't even realized was there. Don, honey, it isn't all because of you, Mandy said softly. Part of it is me. I'm not sure I even want to get married at all. But if I ever do, it will not be to a man who already has children and an ex he has to deal with on a regular basis. We've had a lot of fun together, Don, and I don't regret 1 second of the time we've spent together, she said. She paused, looking at the floor briefly before meeting my gaze again. Don, for me, that's all this was, just fun. I asked to be exclusive with you because I hate condoms and don't want an STD. It wasn't because I wanted to get married. I'm not sure, but I think the crushed remains of my heart jammed against my diaphragm must have caused my breath to catch in my throat. I didn't make a sound. She had already started shredding my feelings, and I might as well let her finish the job. Looking back on it now, I understand why you felt that being exclusive meant more than just a good time. I'm sorry. I truly didn't mean to lead you on. In fact, it never occurred to me that you might want to get married again, considering what happened to you, she said. I see, I said quietly. I pulled my hand back and stared down at the ring box still resting in my palm. I sighed, shrugged, and casually tossed the thing over my shoulder, not really caring where it landed. Thanks for being honest with me, Mandy. I'm sorry I bothered you with my troubles. Please forget I said anything. I already knew it was pointless to try any kind of apology. Mandy was already picking up her coat and purse. Knowing what was coming, I got to my feet and met her by the door. I opened it for her and watched as she stepped through. She paused on the threshold for a moment and looked up into my eyes. It felt like she wanted to say something, but she didn't. We shared that gaze for a moment before I leaned in to kiss her goodbye for the last time. She turned her head, so my kiss landed on her cheek. Wow, I thought to myself, I'm not even worth a last kiss. I knew then that there was no hope whatsoever for us. So I stood back and closed and locked the door behind her. The weeks after Mandy's departure were hard. I'd been dumped before, not counting my ex-wife's rather spectacular ending of our marriage, but for some reason, with Mandy, it hurt more than most of the previous instances had. Maybe it's because she was the first woman I connected with emotionally and not just physically. At first, the children asked me about Mandy's departure from our lives. They asked why she said no, why she didn't want to see us anymore. I told them it wasn't about them, it's just that she didn't want to see me anymore. Danielle, who had just turned 10, was very perceptive for her age. I think, judging from the look in her eyes, she might have deduced more of the truth than what I was willing to say. If so, she was kind enough to let me get away with my edited version. As the weeks went by, my son Brian did his best to mention his mom almost every day when it was my turn to have him and his sister. Of my 2 children, Brian was the one who missed our old family life the most. I wasn't surprised that he was trying, in his own childish way, to get his mom and dad back together. I think a certain amount of that is to be expected. All I could do was keep on with my life. Yes, there were dates, and yes, some of them had happy endings. After the experiences I'd had, I made sure that anyone I dated was on the same page with me, no more misunderstandings. It turned out not to be an issue anyway. None of the women I hooked up with wanted anything permanent with a man in my circumstances. There were some exceptions, of course. I dated a few single mothers who might have been interested in something more, until I got to the part about the crazy, suicidal ex. Then they usually found an excuse not to go out with me. Some didn't want to expose their own child to that sort of drama, while others didn't want it for themselves either. I guess I didn't blame them, but it did make for a lonely life. I still talked to Angela every now and then. She had divorced good old Ben but hadn't taken him to the cleaners, so to speak. She didn't want to keep the enormous house she'd shared with Ben, saying it was full of too many memories. Besides, she wanted a house that felt like a home, not just a status symbol. So, she and Ben sold the house, split the equity, and each purchased other homes, much like what happened with me. She wasn't willing to sell her interest in Ben's real estate business, so she didn't push for the maximum child support she might have gotten. She also didn't quit working in the office, although she did everything she could to minimize contact with her ex. I'll admit it, she was a stronger person than I am. There's no way in hell I would voluntarily spend that much time with Brittany. Nevertheless, she had my respect. Ben hadn't received as much attention from the homemade video I'd uploaded. I'm not sure why that was, and I really didn't care. It didn't appear to have hurt his business, or at least not that I could see. Angela never mentioned it during our conversations, and I sure as hell wasn't going to bring it up. I had other reasons for that, though. Angela never came out and attacked me for uploading that video. That would have been a little hypocritical of her. She had predicted I wouldn't get custody of the children unless Brittany let me have it, and of course, we all knew Brittany was never going to do that. Thus, the release of the video was inevitable. Still, I was perceptive enough to see how angry she was that I'd done it. She had intended for me to use it as evidence in the divorce proceedings and had been horrified when I said what I would actually do with it. I think part of her doubted I'd go through with it. In case anyone's curious, no, Angela and I never got together. We're just too different in too many ways to ever be happy together, and we're both mature enough to realize it. We are friends, though, and she was always there when I needed to commiserate with someone. Her son, Robert, who still allowed people to call him Robbie when his friends weren't around, is a frequent guest at my house since he and Brian are in the same grade at the same school and get along well together. During one of her visits to my house, Angela found the ring box I'd never bothered to look for after Mandy left. It was nothing to me anymore, not worth looking for. Oh, I know I could have sold it and gotten some cash for it, I just could never motivate myself to do it. Angela found the box lurking under the edge of the old Hoer cabinet in the room and brought it to me with a questioning look. I looked at the somewhat dusty box sitting on the coffee table. Angela's raised eyebrow was a wordless clue that she wasn't willing to let the subject go until I explained, so I gave a mental shrug and told her about asking Mandy to marry me and what the results had been. Angela listened without comment. When the story was told in its entirety, she shook her head sadly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Don," she said. Thanks," I said. "But you don't have to be sorry for my failings. I'm just not a good judge of character when it comes to relationships. The truth is, the only woman on the planet who thought I was worth being with ended up being a cheater. Kind of ironic when you think about it. Well, Join the club, she said with a snort. Obviously, I'm no better at picking men than you are at picking women. We both shared a brief, bitter laugh at that, but she was fibbing a little bit, and we both knew it. She had a man she was seeing exclusively. They'd been together about a month now. I don't know if she saw wedding bells in her future or not, but I'd met the guy, and I'd be surprised if he didn't ask her at some point. Do you think that maybe the problem is me? I asked after a while. I don't know, Don, she answered with the frank honesty I'd come to expect from her. It could be that you've got some unresolved issues that are holding you back from connecting with anyone. I know the fact that you never found out why your ex cheated has been bothering you. Honestly, I don't know why you never tried to find out, but that's your business. She regarded me with an evaluating eye and frowned. Your looks aren't the problem, that's for sure, she said, appraising me. I might have actually blushed a little. Look, I'm not a professional, but I think you need to talk to her, Brittany, I mean. Do you really think talking to my ex would help my love life? I asked doubtfully. Well, Don, at this point, what have you got to lose? She asked. Good point, I admitted. I guess it can't hurt. That Sunday, when I drove the children to Brittany's house, I got out with them instead of just dropping them off. My son and daughter looked at me in amazement. I had never gotten out of the car at their mother's house before. Brian looked excited, while Danielle looked concerned. I just need to talk to your mother for a second, I told them firmly. I'm not here to get back together with her, and I won't be starting any trouble either, okay kids? The two of them nodded wordlessly as I strode up to the door ahead of them and knocked firmly. I knocked twice more before Brittany finally answered. She still took my breath away. She was as beautiful as ever, even in the uniform from the diner where she worked as the day shift manager. She had let her blonde hair grow out a bit. It was wavy and probably as soft and silky as ever. I didn't dare touch it to find out. Why are you kids knocking when you know I leave it unlocked for you? She asked, stopping when she saw me standing there, her eyes wide in surprise. Then they narrowed in anger. What do you want? She demanded, barely civil. I want to speak to you for a moment, please, I said. About what? She asked, her irritation palpable. I wordlessly gazed at our two kids, who were still standing on the porch, watching us with a mix of fear and wonder. She didn't appear to take the hint, so I spelled it out for her. Can we please discuss it privately? Fine, she snarled. Get in the house, you two. As soon as they were inside and the door was closed, she turned to me with a scowl. What did the great and wondrous Donald want to speak to this poor sinner about? It must be something desperately important. I want to know why you cheated on me, I said simply. What? She asked, surprised. I said I want to know why, I repeated. Damn it, she snapped. But why the hell are you asking me this now? It's been over a year, hell, it's been damn near 18 months. If you really cared about the reason, why didn't you ask at the time? I was so furious about what you did that I didn't really care why you did it, I answered honestly. But now that I've had some time, I want to know. Why did you destroy our marriage and family? You're going to pin it all on me, huh, she said, her tone defensive. Well, you are the one that decided to have intimate with other people, I said reasonably. I never cheated on you. I never even thought about it. What I had was too precious to me, and I always thought I could trust the love of my life. If you don't want to tell me, just say so, and I'll leave. I didn't really think you would tell me anyway. Brittany's blue eyes bored into me, her anger plain to see. I couldn't understand why she was so angry. Her circumstances were a result of her own actions. All she had to do was be a faithful wife, and none of this would have happened. How difficult was that? Even if she couldn't manage that, she could have at least divorced me before starting another relationship. At least if she'd done that, I wouldn't have lost all respect for her. But she couldn't even manage that much for the man she promised to love and cherish. I watched her face for a few moments, noting the variety of emotions playing across it like images on a movie screen. At last, she seemed to resolve some inner battle. Her eyes dropped to the porch as she gathered her thoughts. Finally, she turned her face back up to look me in the eye. She faltered for a moment. "I've had urges to be with another woman for a long time," she said, her voice very quiet. I had to strain to hear her. "Why didn't you do it in college before we got together?" I asked. "I tried a couple of times, but I always chickened out," she said. "I was afraid that my parents would somehow find out, and also afraid that my friends would think I was some kind of dyke just because I wanted to experiment." After a few moments, she continued. "Jamie used to talk to me when she came to the gym. She confessed to me once that she had also felt those urges. I told her she was lucky. These days there's a lot less stigma attached to bisexuality in women. She could be with someone without fear." She looked into my eyes and gave me a humorless smile. One night when I was working the closing shift, she managed to catch me alone in the women's changing room. It was amazing the way she made me feel. I knew after that first time that I would never be able to give her up. "So you decided you're gay?" I asked, hardly able to believe it. Brittany shook her head. "No, I'm not a lesbian," she said. "But I am bisexual." She paused again, apparently searching for the right words. "There was more to it than that, though. I knew how you felt about monogamy, and I knew that even if I could give Jamie up, it wouldn't matter to you. That one time would be a deal breaker for you." "Well, I admit you were right about that," I said. "I made that pretty clear at the beginning." "Yes, you did," she agreed. "So it was that easy to just throw away all we built in the last 11 years for a quick tumble with another woman?" I said flatly. "I didn't say it was easy, Donnie," she said. For the first time in ages, I saw something besides hate in her expression. "Damn it, Brittany, it couldn't have been too difficult for you." "After all this time, I still can't believe what you did," I said, my temper flaring despite my assurances to the kids. I wrestled it back into control, but it wasn't easy. "What about Benny the a-hole? Where does that fit in?" "He's definitely not another woman," Brittany said with a sigh. "He came into the gym and signed up for a spin class I was teaching. We started talking, and eventually, he became one of my personal training clients. He began talking about the time we spent together back in college and started pressing me for what he called a little fun on the side. But I always turned him down." She paused in her recollections and turned away from me. I didn't push her. What she was saying, though sickening and hurtful, had the ring of truth. Angela had been right. I needed to hear it all. At last, Brittany turned to face me again. Along with my fantasies about being with another woman, I also had fantasies about group intimate. After the night Jamie and I were together, the barriers to fulfilling my fantasies were shattered. I knew I was already screwed if you ever found out what I'd done. I also knew there was no way you'd ever go along with the idea of a three-way. Ben, though, was overjoyed at the idea, but he wanted a little one-on-one time with me first. So, I did him for a couple of weeks. Finally, I got my three-way. It was great until you busted it up. Her voice was matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. In a twisted sort of way, I could see why she might feel that way. For what it was worth, she was correct. Her actions with Jamie had been more than enough to end our marriage. With that in mind, why not fulfill her other fantasies too, right? I shook my head. I almost wished I hadn't asked. I said Angela thought that finding out why you cheated would make me feel better. Instead, it's just made me feel even more inadequate. I wasn't enough for you, and you didn't even have enough respect for me to tell me to my face. You just decided to get what you wanted and to hell with me." Brittany shrugged her petite shoulders. "It didn't really feel like that to me, Don. Or at least, I didn't think of things in those terms. I don't know if it will help to hear this or not, but the truth is, I just didn't think of you at all until I'd already done it. It was only afterward that I gave any thought to what the consequences might be. I truly didn't set out to hurt you or destroy my marriage. My mom says that I'm a horribly weak person, and I guess she's right. I started to say something angry but stopped myself. There was no point. I had pretty much said it all by now anyway. In a strange way, I was starting to realize that Angela was right. Now that the initial hurt was wearing away, I actually did feel a little better. I had learned that I hadn't pushed her away, her own desires had led her astray. Her mother was right, she was horribly weak to throw away 11 years of marriage, a good home, and family for a fleeting affair. But it wasn't my fault. Did you ever love me? I asked quietly. Of course I did, she replied. Part of me still does, I guess. I mean, over and above the effect it's had on our 2 children, I regret hurting you too. That must mean there's still some love there. Were you ever faithful to me? I asked next. Yes, I was totally faithful to you until that night with Jamie, she replied. I'm afraid that for the rest of that whole year, She dropped her head and sighed deeply. My therapist helped me see I was wrong to do what I did, she said, not looking up. Then her voice hardened with anger again. You didn't have to wreck everything, though. She pointed an accusing finger at my chest. You seriously damaged my relationship with my parents. You ruined my reputation so thoroughly that I can't get a job in my field anymore. I don't even think moving to another state will help. And you ruined my poor little Jamie too. She won't talk to me anymore, but I've heard from others that she was smeared right along with me when you released that video. How could you do that to me? Hey, I said, I told you ahead of time I was going to do it if I didn't get my way in the divorce. You could have avoided all that, but you chose to go with your stupid pride. You thought I was a liar like you are. I'm not, though. I do what I say I'll do. Of all people, you should have known that, Brittany. Don't even try to blame your problems on me, I said indignantly. She shook her head angrily. No, you went off the deep end. You had to have your revenge because your stupid male ego was bruised. You got all but hurt because I needed more than you were willing to let me have. No, Brittany, I said, my voice deadly quiet. If that was the case, you should have come to me and told me to my face like an adult and gotten a divorce. I would have been horribly angry, I probably would have hated you, but I still would have respected you. I shook my head at my ex-wife contemptuously. But instead of doing that, you decided to cut loose and be a worthless free agent. You aren't even worth as much as a common streetwalker, at least they are honest about what they are and get paid. It terrifies me to think of you having a parental influence over 2 young, impressionable children, but the courts have had their say, and I can't stop it. I can only pray that your choices end with you. I looked at her scornfully as tears rolled down her cheeks. She stared up at me, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hurt and resignation. Damn it, I knew this was a bad idea. There was just too much anger and hatred between us for a civil conversation. Not that I had said anything I didn't believe, but I truly hadn't intended to get into it with her today. I decided to leave, having at least obtained the answers I was looking for. Just as I turned to go, Brittany stopped me. Don, wait. I have questions too, she said. Like what? I asked, disbelievingly. Why were you so willing to give me up? Why didn't you fight for me? Fight for you? You chose to have an affair willingly and decided without a thought of the consequences. Don't you remember our talks while we were dating about infidelity and how it destroys families? I told you then that cheating was the one thing I couldn't tolerate. You knew that before we were engaged, let alone married. The second you slept with someone else, there was nothing left to fight for. She trembled slightly, a soft sob escaping her lips. She wiped her eyes and composed herself enough to ask her next question. How did you find out? She asked. We were so careful, and you never break your patterns. I gave a humorless laugh. Believe it or not, it was a total accident, I said. I went on to recount the whole story of that terrible morning. As I spoke, her eyes grew wider and wider. When I finished, she sank into one of the cheap metal chairs on her porch. That story is so unlikely it almost has to be true, she said. Google Earth of all things. I had a God's eye view of it, I said bitterly, with a touch of dark humor. Honesty compels me to admit that if it had happened to someone else, it would be funny. Life is like that sometimes. Did you need to ask anything else? I asked finally. No, she said quietly. She stared at me for a long moment before speaking again. Don, I'm sorry. Really truly sorry for my selfishness, she said. I know I have no right to be angry at you. My therapist says that the one I'm really angry with is myself, and it just manifests as anger toward you. For what it's worth, I've told the children that our divorce was my fault, not yours. I didn't give them specifics, but I did tell them that much. Thank you for saying that, Brittany, I said. It eased my mind slightly, for the children's sake at least. I turned and left, knowing it would be a long time before we spoke face to face again. Another year passed. My love life, or lack thereof, stayed about the same. I still had the occasional roll in the hay with a willing woman, but there was no relationship in the offing. I had almost resigned myself to a life of intimate without love. Yes, I'm a hopeless romantic. Quit making fun of me. I had heard the phrase time heals all wounds many times in my life, and I guess there's some truth to it. Time seemed to be taking its sweet time, but I noticed I was gradually letting go of my bitterness. I enjoyed my time with my children. Watching them grow and learn was one of the true joys in my life. Brian, even though he had just turned 10, was already showing interest in the family business. He loved helping me with the plants and especially the Japanese-inspired rock and sand gardens. Danielle, on the other hand, seemed to be gravitating toward a career in healthcare, although there was plenty of time for her to change her mind. She was only 12. And speaking of her age, she was beginning to discover that boys aren't necessarily the gross, icky things she used to think they were. Some of them were fascinating. I knew that stage of her growth was coming along soon, but I hadn't expected it to arrive just yet. It was my heightened protectiveness toward Danielle that led me to volunteer as a chaperone for the school sock hop that fall. Angela and her new husband, Mike, also worked hard to get me to agree to help out. If you have kids that age, you know how hard it can be to get parents involved in that sort of thing. So, there I was, watching a bunch of kids getting sugared up and bouncing around the school's gymnasium. The music was incredibly loud, and while I'll spare you my opinion on its quality, I guess that even though I'm only 37, I'm officially old-fashioned now. I don't even know the name of the other guy singing in Van Halen. Oh, come on, that was funny. I was focused on the kids almost to the exclusion of all else. In fact, that's probably how Angela startled me so badly. Hey, she said. What? I replied a little sharply, not liking to admit when I'm startled. Why don't you go talk to her, she suggested. Angie, what are you talking about? That teacher over there, Angela said, pointing. The pretty brunette in the cream and charcoal sweater. She's hardly taken her eyes off you all evening. Things will be wrapping up in another 30 minutes, so go while you have a chance. I gave her a confused look. A woman looking at me? Angie had to be mistaken. I discreetly scanned the gym and spotted the woman she was referring to. She was indeed a brunette, and in my opinion, quite attractive, about 5 feet 6 inches with a tan, just like me. There was no denying her appeal, though she wasn't looking at me at the moment. I wouldn't have minded if she was. After a moment, I turned to Angie. Are you sure she was looking at me? I asked, my disbelief evident. I'm certain, Angela said, grinning widely. Trust me, a woman always notices these things. Go on, take a chance. At the very least, you'll probably get a night of fun out of it. But you never know, there might be something more. I shrugged. Why not? I didn't have anything going with anyone else, and she really was a cutie. She was almost the perfect opposite of Brittany physically. After a brief pause, I decided to go for it. Angela gave me a supportive smack on the back of the shoulder, discreetly. I'm going, I said quietly. I made my way smoothly through the crowd of jumping children to where the woman was standing. As I got closer, I could tell that while she wasn't old, she was older than I'd first thought. She seemed to be about my age. Her bright green eyes were striking. I wondered if they were natural or if she was wearing contact lenses. "Hi," I said, closing the last few feet between us. "I'm Don Summers, Danielle's and Brian's dad." She smiled. She had a very nice smile and extended her hand. "Hi, Don. I'm Dawn Rogers," she said as we shook hands. "I'm Greg's mom and also teach 6th grade here." Don and Dawn, I thought with a mental laugh. That'll turn some heads at parties. "Nice to meet you, Dawn," I said, smiling. "Likewise," she said. "I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but it's kind of unusual to see a single man as a chaperone at one of these." "I'm sure it is," I said with a shrug. "My kids are worth it. Besides, it's not like I've got anything else going on." I paused, curious. "How do you know I'm single?" "Well, your ring finger is unoccupied, for one," she said with a shrug. "Also, that woman you've been hanging out with all night is here with her husband. I'm a decent observer when it comes to people, and you strike me as being unattached." "You're pretty good," I said. "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am unattached at the moment." She grinned up at me, and it was only then that I realized I was still holding her hand. "Oh, sorry," I mumbled awkwardly as I released it. "Don't be," she said with another of her delightful laughs. "If I minded, I would have let you know." Her smile, as I noted earlier, was very nice. It lit up her face like a beacon and thoroughly enchanted me. Her eyes, whether it was the striking green color or some other quality, were captivating. I found myself unable to look away and had no desire to. After a few minutes, I managed to start talking again. Honestly, I hadn't felt such an intense interest in a woman since Mandy. We pointed out our children to each other and talked a little about them. I told her that Danielle was already talking about being a nurse and that Brian enjoyed helping me with my work. Dawn told me about Greg's love affair with electronics and his attempts at hacking. I was so wrapped up in talking to Dawn that Angela got the drop on me a second time. "Damn it," she said with a grin at my discomfort. "Time to get the kids rounded up. The DJ is already packing up." Together with the other adults, we started getting the kids ready to leave. After ensuring each child was with the right parent, we cleaned up and left. All of our children were beginning to come down from their sugar highs, and it looked like I might actually get a night of peace and quiet when I got home. As we were leaving, Dawn sidled up close to me. I was a little surprised when she linked her arm through mine as we walked the short distance from the school gym to the parking lot. "Call me sometime when you have time," she said, slipping a folded piece of paper into my shirt pocket. "I'd love to have dinner with you sometime." That night was a new start for me. As you might imagine, I didn't wait long to call Dawn. There was no way I could. She was absolutely captivating and I couldn't get her off my mind. Our first dinner date didn't end in the bedroom, but it did include a few very nice kisses. She seemed as taken with me as I was with her, but that didn't mean she was ready to throw all caution to the wind. I shouldn't have been any more ready to do that than she was, but if the chance had presented itself, I would have taken her to bed in an instant. I'm not the kind of man to push for that, though, so we took things at her pace. Dawn was a fascinating woman in many ways. She was very intelligent, but also practical. Like me, she didn't have a lot of cash to throw around, so she'd come up with many simple life hacks to save money and shared them freely with me. This helped me free up some much-needed funds for other things. I also learned that she was a frustrated gardener. She loved growing things, especially flowering trees and plants, but unfortunately, she was cursed with a brown thumb. Luckily, I knew plenty of techniques to nurse ailing plants back to life and was more than happy to share them. I also helped her with some inexpensive tweaks and free labor to transform her backyard into a cozy outdoor living room. When we finally took that step in our relationship, the intimate was wonderful. Her body was soft and curvy, her skin silky and smooth, and her scent was incredible. She wasn't athletic like Brittany or Mandy, but the connection I felt with her was deep. For the first time in a long time, I found myself thinking of it as making love rather than just intimate. We became closer emotionally as well as physically. Dawn told me about her wild days in her early 20s when she'd gone through a phase where she had screwed anything with an erection, as she put it. Just to be clear, those were her words, not mine. She contracted a couple of STDs and ended up pregnant with Greg, which became a catalyst for change in her life. Seeing her baby for the first time had a profound and humbling effect on her. She realized she would have to raise him by herself, as she didn't even know who his father was. There were too many possibilities. Her parents were initially sickened by her behavior but soon came to love their grandson and agreed to let Dawn move back in with them while she finished college and got her teaching certificate. After that, her life turned around. I was the first man she'd allowed into her life sexually in nearly 2 years. I was frankly astounded that no one had pressured her into marriage in that time, and I told her so. She laughed and admitted that there had been 2 men who had tried. They both turned out to be cheaters, but she found out before any commitment, saving herself a lot of pain. Of course, I told her about Brittany and then Mandy. To say she was stunned would be an understatement. Unlike other women I'd shared the story with, she wasn't particularly bothered by my releasing the video online. Her view was that actions have consequences, and she actually thought I had gotten off pretty lightly, all things considered. Dawn got along well with my children, and I have to admit her son Greg was a good kid. The kids seemed to get along well with each other too. Greg was just a couple of months younger than Danielle, and they were in the same grade. Things with Dawn were going extremely well, so well that as our relationship reached the 8-month mark, I was considering marriage again. Thoughts of the disaster with Mandy didn't slow me down for a second. I refused to let the past ruin my future. I knew there was a chance she could say no, but I didn't think she would. I talked to my children about it. Danielle was greatly enthused, while Brian was less so but agreed it would be okay. Privately, I think he still hoped for me to get back together with Brittany. I bought another engagement ring, having sold the one I'd gotten for Mandy. Now, I just had to decide how to ask her. After thinking about it and consulting with my mom, I decided to do it at my 40th birthday party in just 2 weeks' time. It wasn't going to be a huge affair, but my closest friends, my parents, and Dawn with Greg would be there. I thought it would be perfect. The only real challenges during the 2-week wait were keeping the secret from both Dawn and Greg, arranging a secret invitation to Dawn's parents and her brother, and not accidentally giving anything away. Finally, the night of my birthday party arrived. My actual birthday had been the day before, but I waited for a Friday night for obvious reasons. My parents had rented the party room at Misha's, a local restaurant that specialized in ethnic Russian food. I had a real weakness for their dishes. It was a nice place but not overly expensive, and it was kid-friendly, which was an important plus. The dinner was excellent, and I enjoyed it immensely. We had a lot of fun eating and dancing. At last, it was time for presents. I opened them and thanked everyone who had given them to me. Throughout it all, I did my best not to reveal my plans. Dawn had been slightly surprised to see her parents and older brother at the party, but took it in stride. As I finished unwrapping my last gift, I knew I had achieved the surprise. I set the gift on the table and stood up. I wrapped an arm around Dawn and gently squeezed her against my side. She leaned her head against me as I smiled at everyone. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," I said brightly. "You've all made this the best 40th birthday party I've ever had." There was polite laughter at my little joke, and I heard one of the children complain that they didn't get it. The laughter that followed was excellent cover for Angela as she sneaked up behind me, discreetly placing the ring box in my free hand before slipping away just as quietly. "There's just one last thing before we all take off," I said. "I've received a lot of presents tonight, but I'm hoping to get just one more. I'm hoping, in fact, that Dawn will give me the ultimate present." Dawn tilted her head up at me, her expression a mix of confusion and curiosity. I lovingly returned her gaze, locking eyes with her and grinning. Dawn, I love you so much, I said. You've made my life complete. The only thing that could possibly make it better would be if you gave me the gift of having you for the rest of our lives. I dropped to one knee and presented the open ring box to her, all without breaking eye contact. Dawn, sweetheart, will you marry me? The private dining room went silent as everyone, including the kids, finally understood what was happening. I gazed eagerly into Dawn's eyes, waiting for her joyous response. Dawn? I said finally, please, say something. She muttered, her gaze darting around the room. This really isn't a good time to, maybe we should. Dawn stumbled over her words and backed away from me. I sighed and stood up, watching with a slowly breaking heart as Dawn hurried over to Greg, took him by the arm, and exited the restaurant without even putting on her coat. A few moments after her hurried departure, I turned back to see most everyone staring at me in shock. Well, I said, trying to sound composed, thank you all for coming and making this such a wonderful evening. Have a great night, everyone. I offered a big, forced smile and collected my things. As I put on my coat, I glanced at the ring box sitting on the table. I was tempted to toss it aside like I had with the last one, but instead, I tucked it into my coat pocket and gestured to my kids. Would you like us to take the kids tonight? My mom asked, grabbing my arm lightly. I shrugged, not really caring. Do you guys want to spend the night with Nana and Pepe? Yeah, that'd be cool, Brian exclaimed. Dad, Danielle began, I'm so sorry. Thanks, Danny, but you don't have to say anything, I said firmly, cutting her off. I wasn't ready to hear anything like that just yet, and thankfully she picked up on it. Just remember, I love you, Daddy, she said softly. She hugged me tightly, her little arms squeezing me as hard as she could. Then she gathered her things and followed Nana out to their car. My dad lingered for a moment. Strike three, he said. Strike three, son, he replied matter-of-factly. Fortunately, life gives you more than one turn at bat. There will be others down the road. Well, if nothing else, at least I've proven I still know how to pick the good ones, I said with a bitterly sarcastic smile. Dad shrugged and sighed. Well, son, life takes a big hit on all of us at some point. You're not alone in that. All you can do is try to shrug it off and keep going. You go on and work off the stress however you see fit. Your mama and I will take care of the kids, and if you need to talk, you know we're always here for you. I took my things in hand and left. While Angela and Mike were settling the bill, I could tell Angie wanted to talk to me, but thankfully Mike stopped her. I knew she just wanted to be a friend, but the last thing I wanted at that moment was a friend. The drive home was mercifully short. As soon as I got inside the house, I double-locked the door, dumped my stuff on the sofa, and started on a serious bender. It didn't last as long as I wanted. I didn't keep any hard liquor at home, and my beer supply wasn't up to the task. I considered walking to the liquor store down the street but quickly dismissed the idea. Getting blasted would feel good, but I didn't need the hangover tomorrow. Instead, I sank into my recliner and binged on some 80s sitcoms on Netflix. After a few hours, I was feeling drowsy. I woke the next morning with a desperate need to pee and a wicked kink in my back from sleeping in that recliner. I made a mental note not to do that again. As I took care of my morning business and then showered, I reminded myself that I'd need to make some changes in the future. After drying off, I put on some clean clothes and set out in search of breakfast and some aspirin. Evidently, I'd had enough beer to manage a hangover after all. As I scrambled my eggs, I tried hard not to think about Dawn. The emotional pain hurt far more than my head did. What had gone wrong? I was so sure she felt the same way I did. My traitorous mind revisited the fact that I'd felt the same when I proposed to Mandy. I decided then and there that I was done with the whole concept of marriage. From this point on, intimate buddies seemed like the way to go. I finished my breakfast, cleaned up the mess, and then spent some time in the basement using the weight bench. The physical exertion was just what I needed to work off some stress and anger. After that, another shower was in order. As I was drying off afterward, I remembered I hadn't turned my cell phone back on after last night. I turned it on and found my voicemail was full. There were also a bunch of texts. I skimmed the texts first and saw they were from friends offering sympathy and support. The voicemails were similar, except for one from Dawn. It was only a couple of seconds long and simply said, "I'm sorry, my love. Please believe I have my reasons. Hopefully, you'll understand and forgive me someday. Goodbye." I didn't return any of the messages or calls. I spent the rest of the day watching TV until my parents brought the kids home that night. So that's basically my life story. In many stories I've seen, the cheated on husband ends up rich, married to a supermodel 15 years younger than him. Some marry single moms, expanding their families and living in mansions while their exes regret their decisions. I like those stories as much as anyone, but that isn't what my life has been like. It's been 10 years since my divorce from Brittany. Danielle is in college studying nursing. I was a bit surprised she stuck with it all these years, but she's doing well. Brian has just graduated high school and will start college in the fall as a business major. Whether he'll want to join the family business is yet to be seen. I'm 45 now and still single. I have the occasional rendezvous for a bit of bedroom fun, but there's no one in my life I'd call special. A year ago, Mandy reappeared in my life, kind of. She was just after a good time, and this time, she made that clear from the start. We had fun together for about 2 months before she moved on with no hard feelings. She asked why I never got married, and I told her the truth, it's not worth the risk anymore. I would love to have a wife, to wake up next to the same face every morning and know she'd be there for the rest of her life. But some stories don't have happy endings, and for now, it looks like mine will be one of those. Dawn's parents told me she moved away about a year after my disastrous marriage proposal. To be clear, I didn't seek out this information, they came to me hoping I could convince her to move back. I thought that was crazy, considering the thought of being with me might have been what drove her away in the first place. I don't know for sure, as Dawn never shared her reasons, and I don't care enough to ask. Brittany, on the other hand, eventually got married. She and my son Brian spent several years trying to reconcile, but that wasn't going to happen. I don't believe people change who they truly are. Britt was a cheater, and no amount of regret or therapy would ever change that. Eventually, they gave up, and she married the owner of the diner where she worked. The kids say they're happy. Good for them, I hope for his sake he made her sign a prenup. She's still very attractive. My father died a few months ago, leaving the business to me. I'm sorry to say that I don't think my mother will be here much longer. She's grieving too intensely. The agony of Dad's loss is evident in every look she gives me, every word she speaks, and every motion of her body. The kind of loving, devoted marriage they shared was what I always wanted for myself, but maybe that kind of thing isn't possible in our modern world. I'm a landscaper, and philosophy is something I'll leave to the experts. Before she left me the second time, Mandy asked an interesting question. Do you have any regrets? Well, yes, I said. I regret that I married a cheater. I regret that I wasted time on Mandy the first time and on Dawn, thinking they were potential mates. I regret that I just can't seem to meet anyone with the same values and desires that I have. But then I know what Mandy was really asking. She wanted to know if I regretted making Brittany a famous amateur spicy star. She wanted to know if I regretted divorcing her as quickly as I could and holding on to my anger for years afterward. The truthful answer is no. I regret that the release of the video was necessary, but I don't regret doing it, and I never will. She had it coming. If I had it all to do over again, I would make the same choices. Maybe I saved her new partner some trouble. If so, then at least some good came out of it. As for me, I'll keep working, loving my kids, and watching them grow. I look forward to meeting my future grandkids when and if the time comes. I will never completely abandon the search for a wife of my own. Like I said before, you have to seek if you're going to find, but it's no longer a priority for me. I'll enjoy whatever happiness I can find when and where it appears. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it isn't a bad life. And yes, during my downtime at work, I still occasionally indulge in a bird's eye view. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.